Do you all see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. But I noticed that we made a syllabus, of course, in September, October timeframe. It made sense to also put something out in the public. Our ambition and several things in it are still value up until this day and true. Some others are a little bit different. So I think this slide deck is a better, let's say, status quo and gives food for thought and discussion. So the syllabus we will definitely update in the coming weeks based on the final draft course that I'm about to make. So if you're new to DASA Leader and also for customers and other people that want to read up, I would not recommend just read the syllabus, because then you will miss out all of the stuff that we'll discuss in a second. For today, I think the main goal is bring you up to speed. Almost all of you I have had some talks with, and probably you with each other as well within ITpreneurs and the wider DASA team. But I like to get your input, and also it helps to, as a team, think of how will we bring this to market. I think that's one of the important things. In parallel, I will spend the coming weeks continuing with the courseware, and there will be some review on the content involved. But it helps, of course, to have literally a deadline, because one of you, for example, sells the course to a company or somewhere else, so that we have to deliver. And for you to be able to do that, it helps to know what it is, the product. So we'll go into the why first, a little bit of positioning, then the learning outcomes and some characteristics that we have thought of to position this course, also to make it stand out in the market compared to some other courses. Also different than other DASA products, or some of them at least are at the moment. But that has implications, as we'll see, for the delivery format, the way we do the training, the assessment, and all kinds of other logistics that might be involved. And then there's a sneak preview at the end of what kind of content is in it. Some key storyline, but I will not bother you with all the contents, not only because it's too much, but also because it's simply not finished yet. But I think it gives a rather broad overview of what you can expect and what you can also promise to people that you talk about this. At the end, there are a few considerations that I came up with, but there are probably many more. So you have those questions already, perhaps, or otherwise after this half hour. Don't refrain from sharing it, because it can only become better if we know your perspective. So why did we develop a DASA leader training? In my perspective, of course, several years ago when we made the portfolio, we promised, of course, several trainings, and for some time we had this 3-layer picture that is on slide 7. We'll come there in a minute. That promises leadership trainings, and there was already a placeholder made for DASA leader, but we started with coach and product owner, so there was still a gap. I think in the same time, in practice, where I was also working from several roles, I saw that many leaders and many organizations struggle with actually doing DevOps transformations or digital transformations in general. And also well-known firms such as McKinsey have reported about this, and quite a significant percentage of those digital organizational transformations actually fail. And it has often to do with leadership and how to make sure that everybody in the organization is involved in the right way. Our ambition, our modest or very not modest ambition would be to change this percentage of 30% that is succeeding to a higher one, for example, at least half. And the definition of success, of course, is hard to measure. It's very unique and situational, but it can relate to things like it is more in line with the expected quality boundaries, budget, time that is anticipated in the start. So if we can claim that DASA contributes to that, I think that's a very powerful message, and that many decision makers in companies would be eager to go themselves or send their staff and their people to also this training, to grow the body of knowledge and get tangible hands-on practices to deal with these issues. In addition to, of course, products that DASA already offers and other investments those firms make. Second ambition, which nicely relates to that is that we as DASA also want to build a growing community. We have, of course, a global community already, an ecosystem with all kinds of ambassadors, influencers, people who have a certification, etc. We also started 2 years ago with a enterprise leadership forum, which I'm leading. Locally, we have done some great events. My personal opinion is on a global level, we have not made that much of a structure yet, and we can do much more to invest in it. And one link I see is that if we couple that to this training in a nice way, everybody who follows this training can in a way become part of this global community of leaders, because simply he or she will fill his backpack with interesting knowledge and will definitely go out in the field to test things out, fail, learn from it, share successes, etc. And that would be very powerful if we can accommodate for that in various ways. For example, in the next Enterprise Leadership Forum events we organize, we could also ask alumni of this training to pitch in. We can also ask ambassadors and influencers in certain geographies to help out with people who follow this training or try to put things in practice in their organization, to coach them or mentor them. There are all kinds of variations. So those are the two main goals, that we want to create a leadership community and of course change the status quo in terms of leadership success. And that's why I think we came to the following two main themes of this course. And they're, of course, not completely orthogonal, so they relate to each other. But the first one is that we focus a lot on what is leadership and what makes a successful leader in a DevOps transformation context. And the second one is more on, okay, how can we make DevOps transformations in organizations more successful? And of course, we know that leadership is an important element to that and an important prerequisite. So they're related, but those are two perspectives we use throughout the training. So that's why written in text here, and I did it mostly not to read it fully right now, but for you to read after and use this deck as a reference. That's why we focus on leadership. And what leaders should do and what they should, because they're formally responsible for certain things, they need to maximize the business values, but they also involved with creating the right teams, the culture of high performance, etc. And they ideally use philosophies from Agile DevOps of DASA to do that successfully. On the second hand, they also need to make sure that the DevOps transformation is envisioned, but also implemented in the right way. And that involves a lot of stakeholder management, but also target setting, governance, etc. And there are all kinds of patterns and principles from a people, process, technology point of view that we want to give to students of this training to increase the chance they are successful. And every transformation is highly situational, as I said, but we want people to be as aware as they can be, and to have access to as many principles and practices that they can think of when they encounter certain situations. Well, that leads into the following qualification objectives, and what you see here related to Bloom levels of learning. There's not so much focus on simply listing or understanding things, because those are the lower level levels of Bloom, but it's more about critically appraising, analyzing, and applying knowledge. So basically learning by doing and reflecting on things, to internalize it and put it in your situational context to your benefit, which is harder to do, and it's definitely hard to promise just by following a traditional course and putting 200 slides over somebody's head that this will automatically work. But the ambition is that DASA leaders will focus on these aspects. But the sneak preview is already that will not happen by just attending plenary sessions with a trainer or peers. It will happen in their work context. But we want to enable them to be as successful as possible in that context. Well, this is, like I said, the positioning in the portfolio. It basically completes then this initial portfolio that we came up with some years ago. So it's good from a marketing point of view to have this product in our midst as well. And of course, we do have to see how the content evolution is going and how it relates to other programs and what kind of learning paths we think are most successful in practice. We will see in a second that we deliberately did not require other DASA courses to be taken first as a prerequisite. We do strongly suggest that people read up into basic concepts and are familiar with DevOps Agile practices before they do the leader program. But it's not compulsory to do a fundamentals course first, for example.
We are even evaluating making fundamentals courseware or curriculum available to all the participants of this program as a reference. So if they have done it, it's great. If they haven't done it, it's something which is available and integrated. So
yeah, that's a good point. And then we can strongly advise them to read up and make sure that they are familiar with the key principles and practices, so that we don't waste too much time in the classroom to talk about that, because that will then the ambitions of this course will not be met.
Yeah, the same happens for the coach program, where you typically find a 2-3 hour delay if you have folks entering the program who are not yet up to speed with the principles and the competence model. So we also provide a small subset of reading material that they need to complete up front. So, but I think it's a good idea to have all fundamentals there. Yes.
Yes. And here I try to summarize the differentiation between the 3 leadership trainings that we propose in DASA. And of course, those differences are sometimes a bit subtle. And I also looked at the DevOps coach program, and here and there you see also attempts to help organizations with their transformation roadmaps, etc. in the end of the program, and it makes sense. But the main differentiator for me is that as a coach, that what the name implies, you're definitely trying to enable organizations and leaders and specialists in those organizations to be as successful, while as a leader you are actually accountable and in the end responsible for doing that. And there's this distinction. So you ideally, as a DevOps leader or a manager in an organization, would highly benefit from DASA DevOps coaches to be around you or in your transformation team, but it's a different perspective and angle. You have to. I also see often in practice that coaches do less with the nuisance of HR and finance and governance things, because they're not on payroll and responsible for those things. But when you really want to transform, you will encounter those issues as well. So I think those can go hand in hand. And if people followed already the coach program and they're willing to grow more into a leader role, there will be some overlap, but I think the perspective will make that there are sufficient non-overlapping topics to make this even attractive for experienced consultants and coaches as well. But we'll come in a second to for who we think this training is mostly suitable. Well, this is positioning in the DASA framework, the competence framework. Of course, it's quite ambitious to state that we will use this training to lead up till level 4, which is the expert level of the model. You could argue that that's simply only possible in practice, and I agree. We agree that in general, level 5 can only be gained by doing it in practice. For level 4, you could argue that in this course, you will get in-depth treatment of leadership challenges and practices that you will encounter, but with the nuance that, of course, it only works if you learn by doing. So don't expect by following this course, leaning back and just listen to a trainer that you are an expert leader. That we will not promise. But it also helps to differentiate on the skill levels this from other products. It goes a little bit deeper into the role of the leader and what leaders should or shouldn't do in transformation context. Well, then we thought, okay, what would be the ideal way to design this course? I think Dimitri had a few good examples by also of trainings that he followed himself. I had my own experiences. When you think of a typical MBA training, for example, that looks quite differently than a DASA fundamentals course, for example. And also looking at the COVID and the way we do online trainings, and that training market will maybe change indefinitely in the future from now on. We thought of what can we do to make it as attractive as possible and also future-proof. few things that we believe should be built in the core to make this training interesting and standing out is that it's a lot about in-depth discussions and quality and not so much on quantity. You can, I sometimes try to capture all the things I read and find on the internet and hear from others, but I quickly decide, okay, this you're never done anyway, and then we're flooding the students with information. It's much better to give them some inspiration and have quality discussions about anecdotes, examples, and let them pitch in themselves by what they experienced in practice. So it's about this quality time that you have with each other. And of course, to get more out of this training, you need to put more time into this training. So of course, participants do need to study things and are inspired to do some further reading if they like. So a large part of the training experience is also outside of the plenary hours you have with the trainer. That's something that we need to be aware of, and we cannot control that. And my experience is that it depends a bit on the participant, how much he will put in, and also how much he will learn from the course. There's a difference from people to person, of course. We also want to emphasize that it's not so much about the certification itself, although it's nice to give this DASA stamp on it, but we want to grow leaders and we want to make them part of our DASA ecosystem. And that's why we don't want people in the room who focus too much on, okay, I'll lean back and I will make a multiple choice exam and then I'll get my certificate and I put it on my CV. That's not the type of training we want to create.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I just want to see if we can take 30 seconds to just reflect on it. There is no right or wrong answers here. It's more of a reflection for ourselves in terms of value associated with the course. Mm-hmm. So in my view, there are always three dimensions to this, right? One is, what do you learn, right? And so the skills you gain, the competence you create, that's one dimension. And I think you're clearly highlighting, Rick, that that's the primary or the most important dimension which we want to focus on in terms of the value. There are two other dimensions. One of them you mentioned, right, which is about the getting the credential, right? And therefore being able to highlight that, right? That helps in your career development, helps in whatever, right?
Yeah, and helps us as DASA as well. Yeah,
helps us as DASA as well. But I'm talking more about the value proposition for the individual.
Okay, yeah,
less for DASA. But for the individual, it helps with the self-esteem and whatever, right? The third aspect is the network that you create and the fact that you become part of a community and the ongoing support that you also receive as a result of being part of the community from the community, which is not very obvious to begin with, but also not to be underestimated. And I think in terms of the value proposition and looking at the way we are at least intending to design this, right? Intending to design the value, I would suggest that we don't lose track of the three pillars because for different people, different pillars will stand out more, right? Based on their own situation, based on their own psychology, based on their own level of personal maturity, etc.
Yeah, good point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then two other characteristics that build on this are that we think that in the training there should be a lot learning by doing, but also by discussion and from each other, and facilitating this as a trainer instead of just sending the truth or the one single solution, because there isn't one. And also, I think this community that Sukhbir already highlighted is also listed in the fourth one, because ideally you realize even more than before attending this training that you're never done, of course, learning and growing as a leader. It's not that you reach a certain level and say, I'm done, I crossed this box and now I'm don't have to learn anything more. You become a more active member of the DASA family, you can call it like that. All kinds of new doors might open for you, but you can also give back. And we can try to facilitate that. There are some ideas on that later on, for multiple reasons, but especially for this third reason for participants to do this course, because they're building their network and their community. Then some implications of these 4 criteria for the learning design. For first of all, looking at the target audience, we had some discussions also in recent days with Soekbier, and I agree that at least this training should be very inspiring and interesting for managers, also at senior levels. At the same time, we have designed from the start that we don't want to put emphasis on the fact that leadership is something that you only can do when you're a manager or senior manager. The whole point of transformations failing is that people in the trenches sometimes underestimate the fact that what kind of things they can proactively do and what kind of change they can bring by simply experimenting, by stepping up, by raising their hand, etc. So by treating leadership as a role instead of a function, then you suddenly broaden up to a much bigger potential audience, as long as people understand that there needs to be some ambition and some prospect for them that they want to actually play a leading role in a transformation. It's not that a cloud engineer that is in a team comes to this course and wants to become a very expert Docker specialist. This training is not about that, but it can help him if he is, for example, eager in finding out, okay, my platform is actually top notch, but why is it that nobody in the software development teams is actually launching their stuff on my production environment? Why, if I communicate with the product owners of the business, they don't understand my language? What can we do to help each other better? There are all kinds of organizational and leadership cases involved then, which also can be helpful for this young specialist in this mini example to grow his leadership skills. It's of course different than when you are responsible for a whole IT department. So we need to learn in time, especially when we craft classrooms, who we will put together. Because although this example could be interesting for that person, if you're a CIO of a company and you want to hear from other CIOs, then it might be less interesting to hear the case studies of this young cloud engineer. So I'm a bit struggling with it still, that's one of the there's a risk there, and on the one hand is very small.
But is that true? Is that true though? I mean, it might also be relevant for the CIO to understand the practicalities of. So it would not be necessarily a bad thing to understand what is happening on the work.
I agree to a large extent if it's an in-company training. Then it would be very interesting to make, but if it's an open enrollment kind of forum, then the CIO of an airline would be a little bit disappointed if in his DASA leader classroom he will find product owners and architects of different companies. He would have expected more leader roles than more managers. So that's something it's on the agenda to look for when we sell the course, and also maybe do some assessment upfront to decide who will put in front of the classroom, but also in the classroom. The implications for the course contents are as follows. We think that especially those busy leaders are typically not able to spend days in a row in a classroom, and we also want them to learn by doing after the plenary session. So we want to propose a modular approach spread over multiple weeks, because there's also time for reflection, homework exercises, even though they're not all compulsory, and also prepare the next session. And I think, if I heard correctly, that in the DASA coach program, this approach has been implemented also, and in some other instances. For example, I once did a virtual version of the DevOps Fundamentals Masterclass that also worked quite well, because there was time in between of the sessions, also for the trainer to reflect on what can I do next time to put more emphasis on this or that. So this is an important thing to realize from a sales and marketing perspective, because just selling this as a volume product to the States or Japan and saying just schedule it 2 days in a row or 3 days in a row, I would strongly not advise to that. Balancing theory and practice is of course already mentioned. I think it means mostly that we try to let people pre-read as much as possible before the sessions and advise them to do that, so that in the sessions you can focus more on the exercises, the discussions, and the in-depth treatment. And the third one is a little bit more of an ambition than a status quo, perhaps, but with Sukhbir and with learning design specialists that he involved, and with Nidhi and the team in India, we're looking at what kind of learning platform facilities can we create or expand on, so that we build in stimulation for the participants throughout this several weeks that you follow the course, having learning interventions, specific engagement, but also maybe further reading material that you can do, quizzes, videos that you can watch. But it's also quite simply is a platform where you can then also give back. For example, submit your assessments to your exercises, and that will give us the opportunity to build a growing body of knowledge that we can also expand on in all kinds of formats. It can help us for marketing purposes. It can also be something, if you follow this course in a few years' time from now, there's a very rich set of case studies in there, anonymized perhaps, or only be used in the classroom context, that you can benefit from. So if we are able to capture it in some kind of platform or community fashion, that would be very powerful. Well, to do this training, I think it's important to realize that my suggestion would be that it helps, or is required, that you do have some experience, hands-on experience yourself, being in such a leadership role, or in a transformation context, possibly as a coach or as a lead project manager, so that you have known firsthand what kind of resistance you will typically meet, what kind of organizational complexity is involved. So I assume not all the trainers of, for example, the DASA Fundamentals course will be equally fit at this moment in time to do this training. Facilitation skills are very important, and of course you don't need to be the all-knowing teacher, but I think if you have senior executives in the classroom, it will help tremendously if the trainer knows what they're talking about and also have seen contexts like the ones that those participants are in. So I try to summarize my proposal for some trainer selection criteria, and we can discuss later on, because I see the risk as well in the difficulty to grow this leader community and to make sure that this product is kicking off worldwide in a fast pace. But my personal opinion would be to go for quality and not for volume. I wouldn't mind if we start small and learn by the first few deliveries and grow step by step a community of trainers that like and are able to give this training.
Yeah. But Rick, do we need, let's say, more trainers or less trainers with the new model? Because it seems like, yeah, I mean, you need probably more, yeah, asynchronous facilitation, and
yeah,
I mean, you can aim for high quality facilitators, extremely good facilitators, and probably do it less in the current model and the new model. Is that correct? Or maybe not?
It could definitely help to consider having several trainers involved for several parts of the training. Some parts are more about change management and people issues. Others are more about what is leadership, and you. I think ideally to also test the product and see how it goes throughout the modules, it helps to have a small group of trainers who are familiar enough with all the concepts. Otherwise, it's just a college reeks in Dutch, that several experts from the field one by one do their story, but there's no coherent whole then. Yeah. But yes, like we have seen with also the enable and skill training, which I recall years ago when I had a few colleagues at CBO who helped build it. almost none of them could do this training alone. Also for the fundamentals course in the beginning, we had people from Quint who were more familiar with the culture and organizational stuff. Exibia was more proficient with the technical automation side. I think for this training, it's mostly a bit of seniority on training those, let's say, more senior people. Then it's that you have to have more wisdom and knowledge in your pocket. And if you do that very well, you can facilitate the learning process quite well, and you don't need to be that all-knowing of the contents. But yeah, we have to find out, of course, where the sweet spot is.
But the 2 years, I mean, so I'm gonna read it, I think, well, it's probably not a lot. On the other hand, if you have 2 years and you're a real manager, leading DevOps Agile transformations, doing it for 2 years, I mean, how many folks are out there? I mean, probably not even so many. So I just think on one hand, it sounds, well, why not 5? But on the other hand,
yeah, no, that's why I came to 2 for that same reason. Yeah, it's a good. It's also a struggle I have. On the one hand, I think this is already quite ambitious and difficult to find this teaching force. On the other hand, if you do not have these requirements, then you run the risk of quality. But when delivering such a more premium product, I think, at least
credibility, right?
Yeah, I
so
realize
it's not just quality, but also credibility, right? You're standing in front of the class talking about transformations while you have not been part of one. That's a clear, immediate loss of credibility for many people who will be attending the program.
I have shared a list of people that I think are suitable candidates. So it's not that we're empty-handed at the moment, but I also wouldn't, out of my head, know 10 or 20 of them. And I guess we don't need them right now. But just like with growing community chapters and ambassadors, we need to be careful in not too easily allowing everybody to be trainer for this course. A bit more strict than we did with, for example, the fundamentals. That would be my suggestion. Well, the implications from the course participants' point of view, some things we already mentioned, but I think it is fair to emphasize that ideally they will not spend just 24 hours. Of course, you can do it in 24 hours because then you just attend 8 sessions, which are all around 2-3 hours per piece. But then, of course, you will have not read up, you will not put things in practice, and you will also not deep dive with certain materials afterwards or in between. So the general rule is you can get much more out of this program, but it does take some investment. So realize that upfront, dear participant. And ideally, you schedule this in time in a period that you also have time to invest in yourself in this leadership development. Otherwise, maybe do it in half a year from now. That would be my suggestion. Another thing that's important to emphasize that we would like people to share and be vulnerable in that sense. We can easily propose things like Chatham House rules. That is a typical, often used format for leadership trainings, that you agree upfront that everything that you say and content that you will share in the classroom will only be used in that context and not be used outside. That typically helps for people to be very transparent and use also nitty-gritty details of things they're bothered with, failures they encountered, and that will be very valuable for the other participants and the trainer, of course. But you need to create psychological safety before this to happen. So that we need to, I think, make sure for course participants that the training, the quality of the training, and the will be much higher, but it does require for them to open up to each other. Then a standard format that we anticipate for the training. This is the advised format. There are 8 sessions. Well, there are also 8 modules. There is a module 1, or 0, I mean, but it's typically an introduction module that looks like this presentation to emphasize how it is designed, the course, and why. So that can be combined with module 1. So there are 8 sessions of 3 hours. Anticipated, and then somewhere in the weeks after there's a deadline for an assessment, and I will come to it in a second to what that assessment entails. That can be on the same date, but ideally that's a bit later in time so that people can spend some time on it. Of course, this depends on the training provider and the ambition of the group, how complex and how advanced you make it, but you can also experiment with scheduling 2 sessions per week, perhaps, so that the total time span will be a bit less. So that's why I wrote down 4 to 12 weeks is the preferred duration. In terms of assessment, we quickly came to the conclusion that it makes not so much sense if you have the setup like we explained to end up with a multiple choice exam. Of course, it can help to test some concepts, but for the participants, the target audience we anticipate, that will be a dissatisfier typically. They don't come to these kind of courses to do those kind of tests. You could also consider by only focusing on attendance, and if people did that and they had good discussions, that you give them all some kind of certificate of attendance, but ideally you want to raise the bar a bit more. So that's why we came up with 2 options that we want to propose to them, and participants could also choose between them. Ideally, we want every participant to end this whole learning exercise by having a draft DevOps transformation roadmap ready. And because he or she as a leader will learn about personal leadership, but also what he or she should do to make the change in the company that is needed. And of course, it will be explored what that change is, because it's very different for everybody involved. By step going through the modules, you get input and ingredients you can use to make a draft plan that you can then basically put in practice, or even start already during the training, because it's a modular training spanning several weeks. And of course, it's not about that we are as consultants checking in the field whether that roadmap is actually executed or sound or validated by all the stakeholders and senior management, but it's a trigger for people to actually put things in practice. And I assume that they like to do it. Prospective students of this training actually would have the ambition to need some guidance with this kind of change management things. But not everybody, perhaps, or they think they are not the ones to initiate this. What then is a second option is to pick 1 or 2 topics that they liked a lot in the training, and we trigger them to do some deep dive on it, write a position paper, which is typically an opinion piece. So not a scientific article with all those scientific things that are dissatisfied to some people, but just more of a blog post or a potential white paper kind of style thing about the topic, ideally matched to the practical context they are working in, but also by in writing this, they show that they understand not only the core concepts, but they're able to reflect on it and translate it to their own work context. And I think that's what you want to see, because we want to create leaders. So we want to trigger people to actually do something with all they learned and heard from peers. And for both options, we could consider that, anonymized or not, that in a later stage, DASA or ITP could decide, why not add this to the formal body of knowledge? Would you maybe even like to publish a white paper with us? But those are all optional things that we can consider from a marketing point of view. In any case, it will be part of the learning platform, so for future reference for future students. But this is a completely different type of assessment than we have done in DASA training so far. I guess I don't know how it is done with Coach. And this requires some capability on the DASA end for people actually review those documents. Maybe not grade it in detail, because it's not, for me at least, about, oh, you get an 8.5 and you get a 7.5, but some check of, does it have a beginning and an end? Does it cover the key elements of the course needs to take place? Otherwise, it's a bit silly to ask this much work from the students. So this is ambitious, but I think it could also...
So I think maybe plan another session to talk through the whole assessment approach. That is indeed very, very interesting and can be a massive differentiator also. Yeah,
but it's not a free lunch. So that's I think it would add to the credibility and the premiumness of the training, and to stand out. At the same time, we need to find out what kind of minimal viable product do we need before we can test this. You can choose lightweight forms to begin with, of course, but at least this type would fit the training more, I think, than writing multiple choice exams. So
I would maybe even consider going a step sorry, just one last thing about the assessment. I would go a step further to, I mean, if you want to make it really formal, then that they actually have a call once they submit their paper, or, you know, that they actually have a call where they actually discuss and defend.
Yeah, and I think it's Scrum Alliance or with SAFE. There's some institutes who have, for example, a final interview with two certified coaches, for example, where you have a quality discussion to show that you're really understanding the concepts and put them in practice. That's a variant that you can use. Maybe it's some kind of oral exam form like that could be an alternative as well for some people who dislike writing. But by providing some templates, we can make it relatively low threshold, like for people to fill in the steps or the typical chapters of a draft roadmap. It's not that we want to let them write a 30-page document with McKinsey style, of course.
You can also ask the students to opt in for peer review. So are you interested to be part of a peer review, and you get graded or you get inputs, and also
what we need, that's a very nice one. In module 8, we already anticipate for doing this in the classroom, because module 8 is more of a wrap up and putting things in practice module, so no new contents. We want to ask course participants to give mini presentations about these papers already, and ask feedback from each other, because the whole point is that they form a community and they help each other throughout the modules with typical challenges. So one is presenting and others give some feedback how he or she could deal with it. So it doesn't completely replace, I think, this assessment form, but it could add to the learning experience. Yeah. Okay. Now this I'll skip them, because I agree with Sukhbir that this needs a bit more time to think over, and also other people from a learning design perspective are thinking about assessments and platforms at the moment. Well, the planning then, it's good to realize that this is the most feasible planning at the moment. Like plannings, they sometimes change. This is quite a tough deadline, but I'm committed to, at the end of next week, have I call it an alpha version. So that's safe in that sense. The truth is that after that, the second half of February, I will start with a full-time job at Ordina, which is nice from a DevOps leadership perspective as well, but it will mean that I have less dedicated time to continue the course. So the idea is that after that, we will focus more on having a group of trainers, reviewers available. The review board, by the way, already exists, but it can be expanded. And those people will help, let's say, improve the alpha version and build towards a MVP, because I don't have capability myself to deliver the MVP. And that means that it's important to, let's say, do this handover and this knowledge transfer where needed as soon as possible. And this ties into the discussion of who do we think are the best possible trainers that should deliver this course. I think to use my time as effectively as possible, we could benefit from having some kind of collaborative tooling, Slack or something else, to capture all the IDs and work in an asynchronous way. I will definitely stay involved, but at least at the end of next week, there will be a readable storyline and slide deck available for all the modules, is the intent. But it will not be a training that can be given to the public on 16th of February. I do think it's possible to keep striving for this deadline of end of Q1, but it depends, of course, on the other bullets that are listed on the bottom here and our ambition. For example, if we want to launch the MVP with a suitable learning platform and this assessment that we explained, we need to be ready there as well and have people available. And that's not up to me, but I try to summarize things that are on our joint backlog that we need to do before we can really have a successful 1.0 version. and maybe I missed out a few things. But this call helps, especially from a sales and marketing perspective, because without anybody who buys this training, well, this development roadmap makes little sense anyway. So hopefully after today, you have more understanding and you can discuss with customers and the partners to see who will be the launching ones. And that will be giving us deadlines to work towards. And the participants in those trainings probably will determine what kind of emphasis we'll put on certain things. If they really like this assessment form, then we have to work on that more. If they have specific content that they want to see more of, we can work on that. I think we need to be a little agile there, because I expect a lot of learnings to come from the first few deliveries anyway, by feedback from the participants. Well, then in 5 minutes, a sneak preview, and this is of the contents itself. And I think this is the most important summary slide, and you can read the instructor notes that I have outlined at the bottom later on. The 8 modules are as follows, and basically it follows a little bit the storyline of a prospective future leader. It can be a young or eager or very senior person who has a lot of experience already, but it follows the typical story arc of what you will encounter in a mid to large size organization. Module 1 focuses on increasing the sense of urgency for this person, because he realizes or she realizes, okay, the world is changing, software is eating the world. We have COVID is a nice example of things that are only more disruptive than we have anticipated, but also before COVID, there were things going on, trends in IT that shook that were shaken markets, and companies were replaced by startups. This whole storyline that we've used from the start of DASA is in there. So it builds basically the premise that you better be ready for change and prepare for improving and accelerating your company, if you haven't done so already. It does explain also the various schools of thought of the DASA DevOps. I've written a white paper end of last year around this to explain also how you can see nowadays DevOps as much more than just this core automation things that were highlighted 10 years ago by the first people who talked about it. With the creation of the DASA competence framework, we already broadened our definition, but you see now in practice that it's even getting further and touching upon organizational transformations, leadership, hence, of course, this training. So this is a module that delivers insight to participants. Why do I want this training at all, and why is change needed? Then we start in module 2, focusing on the personal leadership side, and start with yourself. That's the typical credo here. Touching upon various leadership philosophies that exist, and there's no right or wrong, and there's definitely some overlap, but there are some themes shared among them that typically match the DASA DevOps principles and the type of high performance organizations that you want to create. And we ultimately converge that to a DASA DevOps leadership framework, where we I can show that. For example, here we have several leadership philosophies that we touch upon, and we explain them shortly in the training. And this is not a nice image yet, but the media team is working on it. But this is then the leader framework with 3x6 criteria that let's say the perfect leader should have at least some level of maturity in. But of course, it's not that you can be expert in everything, but it shows already by the names. I guess you can recognize the type of facilitative leadership, but also the transformational sides of what we like to see in organizations to challenge the status quo, to maximize the value you can get by new technologies and digital trends. But you should also be able to make sure that you mobilize people, that you manage the quality, that you build the momentum. And there are all kinds of examples and practical anecdotes and practices that we use to explain that. Well, then you know as a leader what you're up to for the challenge, and then you basically start with detailing your or shaping your DevOps transformation in module 3. And of course, it's highly situational, but here you will make the start with your transformation roadmap, which was the assessment option 1. looking at KPIs, but also first of all understanding the strategy of your organization, the challenges, the competition, and translating that in objectives and key results that you want to focus on. But you also focus on what kind of leadership team or transformation team do I need? What kind of governance do I need to set? What kind of communication strategy should I employ to make sure that people will actually be able to participate in this transformation? Because it's just me as a leader, and I witnessed that firsthand, then it's a bit lonely and you're not coming that far because you need to mobilize people and engage them. In module 4 to 6, we'll dive into more details and shaping more ingredients and more practical parts of this same transformation roadmap by focusing on people, process, technology, respectively. And of course, there's some overlap, but in module 4, we focus a lot on talent management, people development strategies, creating a smell of the place, what kind of work environment fits best with high performance cultures, and how you should, as a leader, establish this. Module 5 is a lot about, okay, how do I kill traditional bureaucracy, processes that slow down teams, traditional architecture teams that will keep saying this is right and this is wrong, because it typically does not fit what agile teams would like to do or DevOps teams want to do. And from a module 6 perspective, we go even further on this tension between freedom within a frame, basically, because many organizations in the transformation will first go at the extreme side of self-steering teams. Then we'll find out, okay, this is not going well because the self-steering teams forgot about all kinds of compliance, risk, and information security stuff. So they tend to go back completely, killing the whole transformation, which is also not nice, because then all of your great people will leave. So what is the middle ground you want to take, and what kind of principles and practices exist there? Module 7 then wraps it up again and assesses, okay, you have now a plan, and maybe you have already started, dear leader. But how to make sure your transformation will be successful? How are you dealing with resistance? How are you going to manage complexity? And there's all kinds of change management practices that you can be aware of. Kotter has many pitfalls and anti-patterns for successful transformations. We'll reiterate them to make sure that people are at least aware of them, and hopefully refrain from falling in all those traps. And of course, module 8 is then more of a summary module where we reflect on the whole module 1 to 7 and have all kinds of exercises for people to actually put things in practice, report back, give each other review on the presentations and the transformation plans. And part of the transformation roadmap can also be, for example, a leadership development plan for yourself and for your team, because it's an important ingredient for the success. So we can have also have discussions on, okay, I as a leader would like to work on in the next 6 to 12 months on this and this aspect, because I feel that I'm strong in that already, but by mobilizing the team, I should improve my communication skills, and I will do it in this and this way. I think there's a lot of value in having those discussions with each other. So this is the training in a nutshell, and this is the promise I think we can make when we go to market. That's basically that was my last slide, or this is maybe the last slide. We discussed already some kind of planning and MVP delivery, platform and assessments. We already touched upon a bit. My last thing to share perhaps is about pricing. It's not up to me, but I would definitely not sell this course as a you buy one package PDF for $200. That would be my advice. And I don't know how to do it. It can be a much higher amount. You can even consider subscription fees to the platform. So you will become a member of DASA for a year, at least for free. And you can tap in all kinds of sources and knowledge items. But that of course, yeah, I don't know how easy that is to implement, of course.
Yeah, we will definitely put some thought into it, Rick, and then propose indeed the appropriate overall commercial model to support this. It is indeed unique. Unique in the sense that it gives the opportunity to create a longer term engagement with the audience. So yes, requires a little bit more thought. Also for coach, by the way, I think it's in a way similar
Yeah, and we haven't
there.
touched upon it in too much detail, but I see a strong link with existing ambassador and influencer communities and also the Enterprise Leadership Forum. So regardless of the exact names, they all can play a role in this ecosystem, and if maybe they can be used in one way or the other to help out and deliver this training or activating the people in that community, alumni groups perhaps even. But that's also something that we don't need to have already on day one. We can grow into that. Okay, I hope this gives some clarity on where the course is heading to.
Can we see if we can open it up and see if there are any major concerns? Let's just say it that way. Anybody heard anything which they find unacceptable?
Yeah. So in general, I think it's a very exciting program, very well thought out, with a very modern concept. Also, if you let go of the exam, I think that's, if you can find something else, it will create so much value. So the plans which are out there are, I think, very strong, and not really concerns, but things like, if we have a very tough trainer requirement, that can already implicate that folks in Costa Rica or in Mexico, which were traditional trainers, might not make the cut, being able to do this kind of stuff. So you could also think of a kind of co-trainer that you allow someone who is not yet at that level to do one component or one, to allow them to run the training with strong trainers and still be engaged. I mean, it's just an idea for, when you roll it out to.
I think the risk is not just for Costa Rica example. The risk is for every country. There are obviously going to be, in every country, every geography, there will be traditional training companies and traditional, let's say, instructors. And I think the point is, to make this training work, what is the minimum level of skills you require? So it's, I think, a balance which we have to find between commercial interests and the actual impact and the outcomes that we are able to create. And if we go too commercial, then then long term there's a
this sort of taps into what I was thinking as well, and I'm looking at this from an entrepreneur's perspective. But there's a couple of things, and audience obviously is one of them. So from entrepreneurs, I think we have three audience types, and that's the training organizations, that is corporates or corporate academies, and probably consultancies. So we have to think about, if we push this from entrepreneurs, what is the most receptive audience that we could get this going with. And I do believe this also reflects on the other context. So where are they? So would it be Europe, and then where in Europe? Would it be the States? Would it be South America, or wherever? So I think we need to be careful in positioning this to take into consideration what are the cultural, regional, and societal aspects that make this a workable program for the people that we would be targeting on. And I think that also leads to what was said earlier, and I agree with Rick, this is not an off-the-shelf product. This is not something that you just put out there and say, okay, here's your leadership approach to enabling and implementing a DevOps philosophy into your organization. This comes much closer to consultative selling and even consultative fulfillment. So that does mean that you need to work together with ambassadors or influencers, also on a maybe practical level, on getting this accepted and purchased by potential customers moving forward. And this is not something that I need answers to right now, but it does, I think, challenge us to think about how are we going to, from, again, entrepreneurs' point of view, think of how.
I would classify this more, sorry to interrupt you, but I would at least like you to consider, Rick, that this might be closer to an executive program, which a MBA school like INSEAD or RSM would be running, and they can still be packaged. I mean, they are not always, let's say, very customized. I mean, obviously these organizations do customize the programs for, let's say, if Deutsche Bank approaches them, type of thing. But a lot of the executive programs are also packaged and offered as off-the-shelf products for various leaders, let's say, to come and attend those types of programs. So you could consider that there is a really massive market which is there already for all of these MBA. I mean, Dimitri also attended some of these programs himself, as an example. So
okay,
perhaps
that's fine. I just
wanted
to address this as a a topic of conversation. And the final thing that I've had is, again, from an entrepreneur's perspective, we've been putting a lot of attention and focus on the ITIL 4 certification scheme. Obviously, that has a leader component in it as well, and especially with the DITS certification being released recently. Can we, should we, would we be able to think of a way to either make this program complement or compete, or I don't know, work with what we're doing on the ITIL front? I mean, because obviously we have a number of ITIL partners, and for me it would be probably one of the easiest things if we can align this program with the existing ITIL framework as sort of an expansion or an in-depth opportunity to go more into an agile way of working, besides the still very much process-oriented approach of ITIL. Again, this is not something that I need an answer to right now, but I'm just thinking out loud of some considerations that I have.
You're thinking about building hooks into the DITS program, which leads to
if that helps,
which leads to
in consideration of our existing ITIL partners to look into this as an addition, or again a complementary or even a replacement in some cases for organizations that fit the mold of a DevOps agile approach.
I think it's
that could and
to each other.
Maybe would help us.
I think it's complementary to each other. This leader course of DASA is very much focused to let's say the softer skill areas in the competence scheme, while the DITS course is more focused to the harder knowledge areas to create an overall digital strategy to realize a digital organization. There is some overlap, but the DITS is not diving into very much details about leadership styles. They are mentioning servant leadership, for example, that it is an important topic. But how to apply it, that's not covered in detail in the DITS course.
No, I think an overlap between the two is actually a positive here, because it would organically, be a concept of ITIL being expanded upon in practice to some extent by adopting this DITS, this DevOps leadership, and whether it's coach or this one, I don't know, but if we can somehow connect the two and understand even for ourselves how they are interlinked and where the differences and the individual complementing strengths are, that might help us in positioning, promoting, and ultimately selling the program.
I think there is an overlap in looking to the why question. Why should organizations transition to a more digital organization? That's an overlapping aspect. And then DITS, ITIL 4 DITS dives a little bit more into the what kind of topics you need to take into consideration to be able to make that journey successful. And the DASA DevOps leader is more focusing on how do you manage such a program or such a transition as a leader, from a leader perspective.
Yeah, I agree there, because I didn't necessarily want to mention it, but obviously the entire concept of digital transformation being more than digital acquisition or purchasing a couple of server parks or whatever, or for instance communication tools like Zoom or whatever, is still under a lot of debate. And so we even before moving into something like this of implementing a strategy for digital transformation, there's still a lot of evangelizing to be done in making organizations understand that it's critical to not only their future objectives, but even to their current objectives, especially in the situation that we're in right now. But I think that's maybe outside of this particular discussion about the program itself. But it would be, I actually think it might be part of the, let's say the delivery. I don't know if you can talk about a delivery for this program, but I think it would be part of the discussion of, is everybody in your organization on board for digital transformation, and do they really understand what that implicates and what that means, and that it is not just, you know, understanding the next level of technology.
But this whole willingness and ability to change is a part of chapter 3, module 3, because you can't really start if you don't meet those requirements. And it could well be that they choose a more safe approach or stepwise approach in which they build on top of their process improvement initiatives. But the whole argument is that you could also look at the whole thing a bit more transformation-like or comprehensively, and it doesn't mean that certain ITIL DITS elements are not very valuable to include in your total plan and execution, but this program then adds to that a more how-to approach to how you make sure that this organizational change actually happens.
And that could be a benefit, because one of the issues that some and I think those are traditional instructors, maybe, or traditional ITIL proponents have, is that the ITIL 4 is more conceptual and doesn't really address the how-to elements, right?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why we wanted to emphasize that so much in the learning criteria. And of course, it's hard, but that's why there's so much interaction and exercises, because I looked at the DITS materials, and Marcel pointed at several points, and they're actually very valid and nice pointers to various frameworks, etc. But it's so theoretical, and not the type of training we anticipate here, at least. But they can be complementary. That can be
so
an advantage.
I think that would be actually a very good.
Maybe it's interesting to combine both BITS and the leader course in a learning program at strategic level.
Yeah.
So we go further than Axelos is going, by also talking about, okay, now we learned what we should do to facilitate what kind of aspects we should take into consideration to be able to transition. But how are we going to do it? Now we are going to practice with that via the leader course.
And the only thing I would watch out for then is that you have trainers who are familiar with both schools of thought, because there is some tendency to have some tribal war between the two. And it would not benefit the customer who buys this strategic track in which both courses are part of, to then get them one by one and then see all the differences without having an experienced trainer who can explain why those differences exist and how you can navigate through them. But if you have people who understand sufficiently both, it can definitely be an interesting combination.
I will share some additional ideas in over mail. So with the team.
This has been recorded. I hope it helps you at ITP. I think most people were present to think together what kind of ambition can we pursue now, how we put this to market. Please use me to spar on that where needed, but I will focus primarily on delivering the contents and stay available for shaping the last details of that content in the coming months. I hope this will be a nice, successful addition to the already successful DASA portfolio.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great session, man. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Yeah, you too. And talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rick. Bye.